Hey guys, thank you for tuning in. We're going to talk volunteers today. Big subject, big topic that people want to hear about. How do we recruit volunteers? How do we train volunteers? How do we keep and encourage volunteers? And so I reached out to two friends that I consider to be experts in this area and all things hospitality. And so I'm here with Mary Ann and with Rebecca, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. And so Mary Ann, please tell us who you are and where you are.
Hey, Greg. Thanks for having me today. My name's Mary Ann Sibley. I'm in Greenville, South Carolina. I've only been here about a year and a half. I'm from North Carolina originally. I was on staff at a church in Raleigh for about 12 years and built a volunteer ministry that covered about 4 campuses and about over 1,000 volunteers. So when I finally moved on and decided to go into my own semi-retirement consulting business, I now run Matterspart and love to help churches build their volunteer ministry as well.
Very cool. I actually grew up in Greenville, South Carolina, so I love that city, know it very well. Rebecca, who are you? Where are you? What do we need to know about Rebecca?
Hey, thanks for letting me join y'all. I am Rebecca Carlisle, and I'm in Atlanta, and I am a Southern Baptist preacher's daughter, so grew up in the church and learned a lot from my parents about how to love people well, and I never served in the church with hospitality or first impressions, but always prayed for a specific ministry area, and we were opening a new campus with our church, and the leaders just called and asked if I would be the hospitality first impressions coordinator for the campus. And I felt like God was like, this is exactly what I've been preparing you for. So I got to do that for a while. I was really well invested in for a few years and got to invest in others for a few years. I learned a lot. And then God just made a way for me to start the consulting with other churches. And it's been really exciting and fun. And it's an honor of my life to get to do it.
Very cool. Another tie-in, my wife is from Atlanta, so I love that city.
Yes.
Growing up in the Southeast, huge Braves fan, and so awesome. So we got 3 of us here in the Southeast. I'm in the Carolinas as well. So we're talking about hospitality and specifically volunteers. And so we want to start at the very beginning. We can't do anything without the volunteers. So how do we find them? How do we recruit them? How do we get volunteers? Who wants to go first? Anybody want to take it first? How do we recruit volunteers and find them?
Well, I'll jump in, Rebecca, and
Yeah.
I'll just shoot a soft lob out to you, and you take it from here, girl. But it's interesting what you said. You grew up in the church, and I did not grow up in the church. I was Buddhist for 40 years. And so my perspective, particularly in thinking about serving in the church, comes from a place of, I don't understand church language. I don't feel like I'm qualified. I used to say, I didn't go to ministry school. I didn't know what, I used to say, you people call it, which is now me people. But so I entered into the church world. Really, even though I was in banking and I was a CFO, church world was scary and I was intimidated. And so I kind of always have that fresh in my mind when someone puts the call out to serve or to do something in church. And for me, when I started recruiting, I use that because it's a lot of shoulder tapping, even if you're a large church. And I work for a very large church. But I just think as a leader, you have to really know and understand what is it that you're calling people to. It always starts with the leader, right? And I have to own it, and I have to believe that asking someone to serve in any ministry or at a door in the parking lot must mean something, or I wouldn't ask someone to do it. And of course, we all know there's a bigger purpose for that. And when you see, and you're always, God just does what he does. People walk across your path, and you reach out and you listen and you go, I think that person would be great. I think a lot of churches I've heard, even when the church I worked for was huge, would say, well, shoulder tapping will take such a long time. It's one-on-one. And what I've learned is when you really drawing people on a one-on-one personal level, I mean, this is just Jesus 101, that God does what he does. and they tell their friends, and it just multiplies from there. So I think there's two aspects. There's definitely, don't neglect walking around. If you work at church, Sunday should be your easiest day, where you're walking and loving on volunteers and looking for people to invite them in to what you believe is important. And then there's also the bigger aspect of really making sure, are people looking at what you claim to be doing is important? Is it well organized? Does it seem like they're actually having a good time? I mean, if people look miserable, I don't want to be a part of it. Rebecca and I don't want to be part of something that is like drudgery.
Right.
Church serving should be a joy. So I think I would just start out with those two main areas, the simple one-on-one shoulder tapping, and then the environment that you're asking people to come into sets the tone.
Very cool. Rebecca, how do you go about finding and recruiting volunteers?
I love the shoulder tapping thing. I think the personal prophecy and kind of like knowing your people and knowing the people at your church enough to where you can identify certain giftings in them and draw them into a position and a place to let those giftings grow. And if you can go to those people and say, I think that you are a perfect fit to serve on guest services, and we have a place for you and a need for your leadership and talents and giftings, then that makes people feel like they're seen and that they're needed. And that way they'll have a place to belong and serve and stay. Because that's how I got into it. Someone saw a gifting in me that I didn't realize I had, and they put me in a position that now is just a huge passion of mine and something I never want to stop doing, and want to help other people continue to pursue that. So I think that's super important. One of my favorite stories that I say all the time is that when I was on the way to a church to consult, I ran through the Arby's drive-through because Arby's, and I was pulling through and placing my order, and the person taking my order was doing a great job. He was young, and his manager behind him, when I pulled up to the window, said, "Isn't he doing such a great job?" And I said, "Yes, he is." And he said, "Well, I just took him from the restaurant down the street because I just thought he was doing so well, and I wanted him at my restaurant." And so I feel like that's what we need to be doing as the church, is just identifying that in other people and putting them in a place where we can invest in them and they can also invest in other people. I also think that using your youth, if you're low on the adult help, I think using your youth and investing in them will help them stay in church even beyond the teenage years when their parents are making them come. Because if they have a place to have responsibility, then they'll be attached. They'll also hopefully be around other people who are seeking Jesus, and they'll be exposed to that, and they'll have an opportunity to serve and experience Jesus at the church. And so using your youth is so important in terms of recruiting volunteers, because if your youth are serving, then hopefully their parents will be convicted to start serving as well. And it creates a wonderful community in that aspect too. And then celebrating your volunteers through a couple of different things. But if you're celebrating your volunteers on social media, for example, having a real quick volunteer of the week, that's a quick recruiter that's free, because everyone, their friends who don't even go to your church, and then people who are also a part of the ministry area will see that they're being celebrated, they're valued, and it looks fun. And that's something that other people are going to want to be a part of, just like Marianne was saying. And that's going to be an automatic recruiter for you as well, not just for your First Impressions ministry area, but also for people to want to come to your church and visit it if they see their friend is being celebrated for serving in First Impressions at that church.
That's good. That's good. And I just realized I didn't even introduce myself. My name's Greg Atkinson, and I do some consulting and writing with guest services and First Impressions as well. I was thinking of, you talked about seeing something in somebody else, and the whole reason I got into this, I started out the first 15 years of my ministry career in the worship ministry, and got to a season where I was, after leading worship, I was consulting and coaching church planners, and my boss said, "Greg, you need to be a secret shopper," and pushed me into this new path that I've been on for the last 10 years. He saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, and when he pushed me into the hospitality, guest services, First Impressions world, it poured fuel on a fire that I didn't realize was there. And it just started just stirring up in me. And it's been a decade of just passion. You also mentioned something else that I'm very passionate about, Rebecca, and you talked about teenagers. I love multi-generational ministry.
Yes.
You've seen these churches that hold up the pop signs that say, "You look good today," or "You can sit with us," or "So glad you're here." Why can't a 15-year-old stand there and hold up a pop sign? Why can't they stand at the door and greet? A lot of times, that is not only is it a huge kingdom thing for that kid to get to do, but it also can help fill in some of the gaps where we're a little short somewhere, and we have 3 adults, but we really need 4 for this area. Bring in a teenager, and who knows? I was just talking with, he's not a kid anymore, but a guy who I invested in when he was a teenager, and looking at him now and the ministry career that he has now. But he had to get a start at some point. And so, Marianne, you said something, and then Rebecca reiterated it, that I think we need to just touch on lightly before we move on, because some people are scratching their heads, some people are pulling their hair out. Marianne, you said Sunday should be your easiest day. Some people had a heart attack. And then Rebecca, you talked about serving should be fun. Now this sounds basic, but so many churches and church leaders don't get this. Sunday is like hell day. It is the hardest day of the week. They don't smile. They are stressed to the max. I just wrote about that recently. They're hurrying around to get somewhere to go. They're frantic. They're upset. They're just. If we back up from there, before we move on to training volunteers, when it comes to recruiting, I do believe that we have to have fun, and I do believe that there's a word of mouth thing of people are like, it is so fun being on Marianne's team. You guys have got to come be a part of this. Our Rebecca is the coolest. We have a blast. We have these amazing huddles. Talk about the fun factor. Like Marianne, you started all this with this comment that people are going to write to us about of Sunday should be the easiest day. How now what that speaks to, where my mind goes, is we have to be so prepared and so ready that it just happens. Just like as a worship leader, if I'm learning the songs on a Sunday, it's going to be brutal. If I've been prepping and practicing all week, I can just worship on Sunday and it's fun. But how do you get to such a place? We'll start with you, Marianne, then we'll go to Rebecca, where Sunday is actually fun, where it's a good day and your team has fun.
Yes. That's funny. I just said it, but then when you said hair blowing up, I get it. But when I think about creating that environment, and something you said, Rebecca, reminded me, just a moment to back up. There was a time where Sunday wasn't the easiest day for me, and it's panic or things change at the last minute. And God showed me, we talked about this a little bit earlier with the 3 of us, that we can't not say no for people, and we can't assume anything of other people based on their gender, their age, their status, whatever's happening in their life. And something on one Sunday happened. It was a change, and I needed people. And there was a mom and an adult daughter together. And I'd seen them in the past, and they were super quiet. And I walked up to them. I said, could you hold this basket and pass these things out? And they were like, we don't serve. And I'm like, why not? I mean, I'm that girl. Why not?
I love it.
And they were like, and the mom said, can't you tell I have a speech impediment, which I did not notice at all. I said, if you don't have to talk and you just hold the basket, would you do that? Because I think you can do this. That would be such a blessing. So they did it, and they turned out to be the most amazing greeters. So, it was a mom and her adult daughter, been through, their story is heartbreaking. And you learn that as you get to know your volunteers. And because they had so many things they were working through, they asked to serve at the back door that rarely people went through. And I'm like, that's great, because some people want to be in the front. They go, we're happy to serve there. Well, one Sunday, the mom comes to me, and she was all teary, and she says, I have to tell you what happened today. She said, we're standing at the doors, and my daughter had to go to the ladies' room. And this couple walks up to us, and I started to hand them the bulletin, and they put their hand up and said, where's your daughter? Well, her immediate go-to was like, uh-oh, we're in trouble. And so she said, I started to panic, and they said, no, it's okay. We can't start church until we get our bulletins from you and your daughter. We'll wait.
Wow.
And the mom starts crying, of course. Of course, I start crying. And the daughter comes, and she's like, what's happening? And I just love when God said, you don't have to do it all. And you don't have to be perfect. You just have to let people be part of what I'm doing here. And I think part of it, it's a pride issue, at least for me, I'll speak, feeling like only I can do it, only I have all the information, only. And when I learned to let that go and do a lot of work ahead of time, then we could have fun on Sundays. And we did a lot of high-fiving and celebrating, and I got to really just love on people. Sometimes fun is just walking up to someone and really having a 3-minute conversation with somebody. And people, we all just want to be seen. We all just want to know that we matter. And then God does again what he only does. And you may think you had a lousy day, and then you hear on Monday where people were blessed and people had a good time. And you talk about God just building your ministry from that.
Yes.
Like, I will forever, ever remember that. And of course, we used to do, like in North Carolina, if you're in the Raleigh area, the state fair there is ridiculously awesome. And so during the state fair, we had state fair in huddle. Like, we got darts and balloons, and when they walked in the huddle, we had bagged cotton candy. And they're like, what's happening? I'm like, we're just going to play. We're just going to play, because guess what? God is a God of joy, and we're allowed to have fun.
Yes.
And so it was just these unexpected things that would happen that we didn't have to like be so serious. And in the midst of that, the feedback would be, sometimes I'd come in really low, and I would see someone else just really encourage me. And sometimes I'd be on top of the mountain, and then I got to see someone else I could help. So just being creative and being okay to laugh and be real with people. It's really that simple. Just be real.
That's good. Rebecca, before we move on to training, tell us about your thoughts on having fun as a team and how that fuels recruiting and finding more volunteers.
Yeah. I think just as Marianne was talking, she's so wise. I was thinking about all these things that she was saying, and I think it comes down to definitely providing fun for people, and I also think it's a leadership thing, and also in terms of making sure that everybody knows what the expectation is, making sure that you have team leaders underneath you so that you're not carrying all the burden of everything, and so that you have team leaders underneath you for each of the areas under First Impressions, so that they are well equipped and they know what's coming, so that they can disseminate information, and so that everything's more organized. Also, that every volunteer knows what their expectations are, so that everyone's just kind of free to do what God's called them to for that morning, because they're not worried about all the extra logistical stuff. It's like a second nature thing, and they're empowered to just do what God's called them to do and like work through the Spirit. That makes it super fun. It's also very important to me, at least, and I think also to Marianne and to you, Greg, to make sure that this becomes sort of a missional community as y'all work together and serve together. So that's the value of the huddle that we'll talk about, and the value of everything that Marianne was saying, to get to know your people. And I think if this becomes more of a cultural missional community, and that's the way you look at your volunteers and your team leaders that you serve, then it becomes more of a community, more fun, more of a family atmosphere that people are going to be attracted to and want to join.
Yeah, and I like that you talked about this being a leadership issue. What frustrates me over this last 10 years of this journey with First Impressions is when First Impressions and guest services, and even bringing it down to a more granular level to ushers, greeters, that kind of thing, where it's an afterthought of, well, we just need somebody over there. And they don't put leaders in these positions. That you guys, the reason that you are crushing it and knocking it out of the park, and that have led hundreds and thousands of volunteers, is because you're high capacity leaders. And too often in churches, it's like, well, we got to have somebody over the greeters, and it's an afterthought. It's just anybody get over there. And then, another thing that came to mind is the Joker on The Dark Knight saying, why so serious? Marianne, you talked about people being too serious. And in my mind, where I was going was thinking, this is the ministry where we're supposed to smile. Like if they're like children's ministry and hospitality, we should be the people that are smiling. We shouldn't be serious. And it's not, let me stand at my post and be an usher. Let me hand this bulletin. We should have fun. We should be celebratory. The joy of the Lord should be seen and apparent on us. And then before we move on to training, because training's key, but if you don't have volunteers to train, what are we doing? And so this recruiting is so key. And Marianne, you said something in passing that I have said for years. And I actually just yesterday told this to my wife in a whole different area. She was talking about, I was talking about asking her to ask somebody to do something. And she said, no, they won't do that. And I said, do not say no for them. That is just leadership 101.
Yep.
If I asked John to step up and to lead this team, could he say no? Maybe. Am I going to say no for him? No, I'm going to ask John. I'm going to go to him and say, hey, I would love for you to lead this team. Would you pray about it? And he may say no, but I'm not going to say no for him. And so that's gold. And thank you for bringing that in. Marianne, let's move on to training volunteers. We've got them. We found them. They are part of the team. Let's talk about what you train, how you train, but also frequency. You know, people wonder, do we do an annual training? Do we do a monthly training? Do we do a quarterly? Let's just dive into this key area. How do you train your volunteers?
Yeah. I think when I think back over the 10 plus years, it varied. And so it's really, where are you as a church? Where are you as a ministry with the number of volunteers and what the need is? So there is not one size fits all, but you do need training. And so I think what I have found, again, people just discount it and go, oh, how hard is it to greet at a door? My thing is, we're not just greeting at a door.
Yes.
Like, it's bigger than that. And so I started out where I would have like a big annual kickoff. And then I started building leaders, and I would meet with them a lot, like one-on-one. And then that started to grow. And then I decided, wow, let me ask them what they want. And Rebecca, you talked about this a lot. And we're such leaders of leaders, lovers, that we love our leaders, that I would always ask my people. Like, at some point, I'm sitting there going, I don't have all the answers. And these are volunteers, and they work, and they have jobs, and they have families. And so we can't please everyone, but I think it's so important for your volunteers, especially when you have high capacity leader potential out there, that you give them a voice. And so now that will get messy because they'll feel like they have too much of a voice. But to me, I'd rather have that and have conversations than not have it. And so then I would ask my leaders, and in the early years as we were training, they would say, we need to meet every month. And so I'd go, okay. And I would bring my leaders together. And then after a while, they were like, I think we're good with quarterly. Okay. You know, of course, I would use my discernment of where we were. But then I would empower my leaders to figure out what they needed for their teams. And my job was to stand there with a servant towel and say, how can I serve you so you can serve your team? Like, I served the leaders, and the leaders would dictate. Now, once a year, we would have a big vision of training. But the ushers would sometimes come to me, particularly if I noticed that there was a repetitive issue across several teams. I would get the leaders together and just say, okay, all leaders in one room, what do you think? And sometimes just doing that and having peer-to-peer leaders talk about issues, and I don't have to say a word. I just set the table. Yeah. So I would hear things, and I would hear one leader say, well, we don't ever do that because I think that's hard. And all these other leaders would look at them and go, are you kidding me? That's the easiest thing in the world. And then they would train them. And then my leaders would say, I'm going to show up on your team next week, and I'm going to be on your team to show and serve with you. That leaders serving leaders and being volunteers on teams. And so it kind of morphs over time. But I do believe that you need training. It's got to be more than just logistics. It just can't be look on a map and see you need 5 people here and 6 people there. Yes, that's important. But there needs to be a reason why you put anybody anywhere. We had an offsite parking place that we had to open up, and it was like nobody parking. And our roadies, we call them, our parking guys, like, oh, Marianne, we don't need people up there. People can find a parking spot. I'm like, that's not why you're up there. Like, that's not why you're up there. And I would talk about it. I took them up there, and before you know it, I had leaders taking their roadie teams up to that parking space to train them, and I didn't even ask them to do that. So it's really cool when you kind of create that in culture. You said, Rebecca, of empowerment, and you hold things loosely and you let them go, and they may not train like you, but oh my goodness, it does happen. So training is really critical, but I think you just have to listen to your rhythm, know the rhythm of your volunteers and your church, but you need to figure out what that rhythm is.
That's good. That's good. And Rebecca, I'm going to bring it to you with how do you train? And I know you have something you're passionate about that I have personally said, but I'm going to let you say it. Fundamentally, where do you start when it comes to training? Where do you start with?
The why. Is that what you're going for?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yes. The why behind the what. And yes, that's very important to me. And to me, I just felt like when I was digging into what God wanted to teach me about biblical hospitality, as I was seeking Greg out to mentor me and seeking Jason Young out to mentor me and all these people that I could learn from. And I was digging in and just seeking God for it. I just felt like he said that biblical hospitality, gospels, people glorifies Jesus, not culture, and graces people. And so I just love to talk about that. I think you can spend a whole training, you could do a whole sermon series on it. And it's so worth it to do that, because if you don't know why you're serving, then you think you're just like Marianne said, you think you're just greeting out a door just to greet out a door. And that's not what it is. It's an eternally significant thing that we're doing. It's kingdom work. It's the front lines of discipleship, and it's so important. And so I think with training, the first thing is definitely in that broad kickoff that Marianne does, and like Nehemiah rule, that constant 40 days reminding people of why we do what we do is so important. So that's my favorite thing, as my friends know. But also I think I love and amen to all the things Marianne said, especially about your human resources and knowing your people, that they do have their jobs and they are leaders where they work probably, and they have families, and as I was leading at our campus, I just was constantly amazed at this volunteers that we had and the capacity for leadership they all had, and how much more wise and knowledgeable they were than I was. And I am just always in awe of them. And so for the church to know the value in tapping into their own people and giving them a place to grow is just so important. And so that's why training's so important. And I love when I go do consulting stuff to do a training that allows and facilitates an opportunity for all the volunteers to have buy-in and walk away with ownership of areas of first impression, so that again, everyone can have fun on a Sunday. It's kind of rare, I've noticed, that volunteers are all the volunteers of the different areas are all in the same room and know the big picture and know what's going on in all aspects of first impressions. And so sometimes we'll get together with a church and one group won't know that they even have greeters outside, or one group won't know that there's a need in refreshments, and they won't ever know that some of these issues that are there and these needs are even a thing. And then they're like, I wish that I knew that this was an issue. I could have fixed this a long time ago. So I like to set up trainings where every area of first impressions has kind of a big sticky note, and we go through, they kind of assess the glows and the grow areas for each first impressions section or area, and they themselves can assess where their weak areas are. And then at that point, all those volunteers that are there can take ownership of fixing something in a certain first impressions area, so that the responsibility can be spread out. People can have an opportunity to serve at a different level, and the needs can be met, and y'all can continue to serve with excellence.
That's good.
I love that. Can I jump on that real quick, Greg? Because
Sure.
Rebecca, I just love you.
Oh,
I love that concept of training, and we would even do that, particularly bigger Sundays. Like, for example, we would have baptisms, and we would do baptisms between services, which meant a nightmare in the parking lot.
Yes.
And so, because people, like extra people were coming to observe, or people weren't leaving church because they were staying to watch the baptisms. And having our roadies in the huddle and get that vision and say, today there's baptisms between, would tell our roadies, number one, it's going to be a nightmare in the parking lot. But then it gave them information as to why it's a nightmare in the parking lot. And they would be able to celebrate that. And I would have them come back and tell stories of like, man, there was a line backed up, but we were celebrating in the parking lot saying, there's baptisms today. We're going to get you a parking spot. And so you have your roadies in there whooping it up instead of complaining that the parking lot is a mess because we came together and did what you were talking about, Rebecca. It's so good.
So good.
That is good. And at the end, I'm going to come back and tie a bow around some things and bring some things together. I've been taking notes as you guys say certain key things that I want to bring back at the end and wrap up. But part 3 of this, we've talked about recruiting, we've talked about training, but they've got to stick around. So how do we encourage volunteers? This time, Rebecca, I'll let you start off and we'll finish with Marianne. Rebecca, how do you go about, and I know something you're very passionate about, that all 3 of us are very passionate about, a key element on a Sunday, but how do you encourage your volunteers?
I think all 3 of us really love the concept of a huddle, not just because of it's not that it's trendy right now, but because it's effective to accomplish a lot of things that we want to accomplish in terms of building community, in terms of, I think we mentioned earlier, making sure people get there on time. And so it kind of solves logistical issues, but also building the community issues. And so I was consulting at a church, and I was kind of doing a Q&A at the end of the training, and one of the volunteers asked, well, do you have any materials to help us with the huddle thing? And I was like, no, but I will figure it out. So that's kind of what inspired the efforts to come up with scripture and a quick little commentary that's geared towards first impressions and what we do. So that's become a huge passion of mine. But I think it depends on the culture of your church. A lot of churches like to do the big kind of production of the huddle and really be like the hype guys for the hype guys, which is the first impressions, and kind of get people pumped up, which is awesome. And I love that. But I think also there's other cultures of churches that are more chill and laid back and would just appreciate a quick little circle time. How can I pray for you? Here's a scripture. This is what's happening today. But I think as long as you are making an effort for that huddle and you're maximizing that 5-10 minutes before service starts to love on your people and create that community, to spur each other on, pray with each other, whatever, then that's the most important thing that you can be doing to encourage people. I think Proverbs 3:9-10 says we should be giving God our first fruits, and that's everything we need to motivate us to continue these huddles. That if we are, the first thing we're doing on Sundays is giving God our first fruits, our first time as a service group, as a ministry area, then he's going to bless it. And because it also puts our hearts in a place of, God, do what you want to do and get us out of the way kind of thing. Help us be prepared and open and aware of what you're doing so we can jump in on that. And that's the most powerful thing. And it's so easy because the enemy is all over a Sunday morning to wreck our plans to meet with our people at that point on a Sunday. But I think it's the most important thing to fight for and to make sure that that time happens for your people. And I think that's pretty much my heart for huddles. And I think Marianne has done a great job with implementing that way more than I have. So I think she can speak into that too.
Very cool. And, a lot of people may not realize this. We have a large Facebook group where we talk about this every day. The easiest way to find this, if you're watching this on the internet and you've stumbled across this video somehow, some way, if you go to guestservices.church, you'll wind up in a Facebook group where myself and Marianne and Rebecca are all admins. And we discuss, we chat, we ask questions, we answer questions. And every Saturday, Rebecca posts devotionals for your huddles in the group. So if you're getting together on Sunday and you think, I got to lead this huddle, but I really don't know what to say, she gives you a manuscript. She gives you devotional thoughts and scriptures and bullet points that you can read on Saturday, put it in your notepad or on your phone, And when you stand up there, we just did this last week at my church. The leader of that day pulled out their phone and they went through and shared some bullet points in a scripture. And so we have tools and resources for you. You can check out firstimpressionsconference.com. You can check out guestservices.church. We try to make as much as we can available to you to resource you. I want to go back and hit on a couple key things. When I do these interviews, what I do is I have worked on something for the past 2 years with my counselor, and I'm a big fan of counseling. And I asked him to teach me to be a better listener. And so we have worked on active listening. So as you guys have been speaking, different things pop off in my head, and I've been taking notes that I want to circle back on. One, we've already talked about, don't say no for someone else. Why so serious? We should be the ministry that smiles. But you guys have used the word over and over and over that I think is key, and it's the central message to us living out our lives, gospel-shaped life, and being Christ followers. You've constantly said the word serve or serving, serve or serving. And, I once heard years ago, somebody said, there is no leader without servant leader. There is no leadership without servant leadership. They go together. It's not, well, I'm a leader, but I'm not a servant leader. There's no such thing. They go together. And when we talk about hospitality, we are serving others. We are loving others. From the Old Testament to the New Testament, we see a Bible that speaks of welcoming the stranger, welcoming the newcomer, be hospitable, show hospitality to others. I've talked about before in Titus and Timothy, you can't even be a pastor or elder without being hospitable. It's one of the qualifications of an elder. So this is a huge thing, but you guys said something. Marianne, you said something in passing. You used the word win. And this is something Andy Stanley talks about, defining the win, clarifying the win, celebrating the win. You both have talked about celebrating, sharing stories. So as you lead your teams, when you think of, and I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but when you think of leading at your church in a local context, or maybe you're training another church, when it comes to this area of hospitality, how do you define the win? Marianne, let's start with you.
Oh my goodness. It depends on the areas. Like the wins can be small and can be big. A win for me is when a volunteer shows up to huddle on time. Like that can be a win. A win, going back again, when I think about huddle, it's family. It's like reunion time. We've worked hard all week long. Everyone, and I remember, again, not growing up in church, I could not wait for Sunday. Like, please let me serve. And so a lot of churches I hear say things like, well, gee, I don't want to ask. But when you get involved in that and you get to hear that you're part of a bigger story, and you start sharing things like, oh, a greeter left her post so she could go pray with someone, and she didn't feel qualified, that's a win. Anytime you see anyone that's want to share a story that has stretched them, or they experienced Jesus, or they just realized it wasn't about them, that's a win. And it gets shown in fun things like rescuing dogs and bringing them inside and giving them water, as our parking attendants would do. It could be something as fun as the ushers have decided that we have enough volunteers in the auditorium, and they heard that we're really low on the roadie team. And so the leader took half his team and said, go serve in the parking lot today. That's a win. We're being servants. And so when you start as a leader calling out everything and say, that's a win, that's a win, people start thinking, oh, well, I thought that's just what we do. It is what we do, but we're going to celebrate what we do. You showed up today. That's amazing. And I also just want to speak real quick that sometimes I can be really out there. But I just get so excited, and people go, wow, you have to really be all pumped up. And I'm like, no. I remember there'd be some of these ushers that had this gentle kindness, just this gentle spirit. And I would walk into the auditorium, that seat 1,500, and I just felt so welcomed and so loved and seen. And I remember going up and saying, thank you you just made me feel like I was so welcomed here. And he was like, well, I feel like I'm shy. I'm like, no, this is what the Lord is doing. I said, so I want to thank you for that. And you're a huge win to the team today, because you showed up and, you know, showing up, as people say in life, is 90% or whatever. It's a high percentage. So I think our wins can be defined in so many areas, and we don't want to neglect the small ones or the big ones. I think we tend to say, definitely if someone is saved, that's a win. But if someone has stepped up and prayed with another team member, that's a win too.
That's good. Rebecca, how would you define the win for your team?
I just would echo Mary Ann in terms of all I can think of is win. And I kind of mentioned the same word before, but I think once the volunteers feel empowered, like Mary Ann was talking about, to step outside of their on paper role in terms of this is your role to greet at the door, but when they have the empowerment and the opportunity to step in with what the Spirit's doing, and they're going to step out beyond just their role, and they're going to meet needs where they see them, I think that's where the win is, because the whole point of us doing this and the whole point of First Impressions is to help people experience Jesus. And so, yes, people might experience Jesus by you just smiling at them as you open the door for them to walk through the church doors. But it's also, there's other things that there's the person that's standing at the door to let people walk in is there on purpose. And God has them there for a specific reason. And someone is going to walk through that door. They're going to hold it open for them, where that one little small act is going to change their lives and let them see Jesus and have like shown this act of grace and mercy maybe that they haven't experienced in a while or ever before. And it's going to be special and specific and Spirit-led, which is different from someone just holding open a door for you at the McDonald's or something, because the Spirit is totally there and he's sought after and he's welcomed. And so I think the win is just people looking for more things to do to love on people than just what their job description is. And then also that has been contagious to people who aren't necessarily on your committee, that once it becomes something that is beyond the committee to a cultural part of your church, then that's ultimately what we're working for.
That's good.
That's gold, girl.
That's good. That's good. You know, I'm thinking of couple thoughts as we wrap up. You got Mary Ann, you used the word family earlier. Rebecca, you used the word community. We are a family, we are a community, and that's what the body of Christ was designed to be. We're all part of the body. We all have a role to play. When I think of serving, when I think of volunteers, being a volunteer and leading volunteers, I always start with, when I get back to recruiting, I go back to our church's growth track or our new members class and doing a shape test or a spiritual gifts test. It's amazing the people that come up with the gift of hospitality, and let's put them where they are wired to be. Let's allow people to use their spiritual gifts. And Rebecca, as you were just talking, it made me think of our friend Danny Franks, who has a brand new book, People Are the Mission. And he says in that book that people do not only need, and he has a great pastor, J.D. Greer, amazing preacher, but he said people don't only need to hear the gospel, and they need to see the gospel. People are the mission. They need to see the gospel as well as hear it. Mark Waltz has said for years, people need to know they matter to us before they hear they matter to God. And so, I worked with a church last year in North Carolina. It was a traditional church, and they had some very old school ushers. And in their mind, their whole job was to hand a bulletin, just hand a bulletin. And that was it. And there had not been any vision casting. And so I talked to the pastor about that. And in passing, I just said, if your ushers can be replaced with the table, they're not doing it right.
That's
and
right.
He said, what do you mean? I said, well, you could just take your stack of bulletins and set them right here on a table, and people could just walk by and pick up a bulletin. I said, if you could be replaced by a table, you're not doing it right. And it was like this light came over him of, oh, okay, people are the mission. We are there to serve, to love, to care, to show kindness, gentleness, like you talked about, Mary Ann, with the usher, a gentle spirit.
Yeah.
So good. And then what's cool, when I think about defining the win, there's a number of factors that come into play, and you guys have hit on some huge ones. I have recently done some videos with leaders at Elevation Church and with Saddleback Church, and they have some unique things that they do to fire up their team when they gather together for a huddle. And I do highly recommend that you start doing a huddle at least the 30 minutes before the service starts. But at Elevation Church, they have this one-day principle. Today could be somebody's one day. Today could be the day they encounter the living God. Today could be the day they get saved, they get healed, they get delivered, they get set free. Today could be somebody's one day. And then at Saddleback Church, they talk about, who are you going to impact today? Who is that one person that you are going to encourage or love on or care for or serve today? Who is your one person? And he had a story that tied to a name, Jackie. Who is your Jackie today? Who is your one person? And so all of these things, go back and watch this video. Marianne and Rebecca have just dropped gold in here, and there's a lot to process and take notes and watch it again and again. Couple things that came out to me as you guys were speaking, and that is people want to be a part of something significant. They want to give their lives to something that matters. I said earlier this week in the Facebook group that the book next to the Bible that has impacted me more than any other book is Henry Blackaby's Experiencing God, and it's Join God Where He's at Work. Join God Where He's at Work. And one of you said a little bit ago, talked about being a part of what God is doing here. I think it was Marianne talking about a story at her church. You want to be a part of what God is doing. And that's an exciting thing. And then the thought that I had as you two were speaking is it's a giant flywheel that just keeps feeding each other. People want to be a part of what God's doing, and so we recruit them, and then we train them, and then we encourage them, and more people want to be a part of it. We train them, and we encourage them, and they invite somebody, and we train. It's this flywheel that never stops, and that's the sign of a healthy team. By the way, take this for what it's worth. I've said this for years. After over 2 decades of ministry, you never stop recruiting volunteers. Never, 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 ever.
No.
For whatever reason, people will move, people will leave, people will transition. You have to constantly recruit. Even just to maintain, you have to constantly recruit. And so, Craig Rochelle has talked about momentum and morale a lot. Once you have high morale and that momentum starts to go, then the flywheel starts to spin, and it's easier to recruit. And then the win for me is when they recruit their friends, when they recruit their small group, and they're like, hey, come serve with me. Hey, come to the parking lot with me. Come be a greeter with me. They invite each other. And so you guys have dropped some amazing gold and wisdom in this session. I hope that people will watch this. I hope they'll be challenged and stretched and encouraged. You have offered some amazing, amazing encouragement. I'm going to start with Marianne and then end with Rebecca. What is just one last word? It could be wisdom, encouragement, thought, prayer. What is one last thing that you would like to leave with anybody who's stumbled across this video or watching this video?
Listening to you talk, the thing that came back to my mind is that a lot of times in putting together a First Impressions team, it's a lot of logistics, and those are important. Basically, you're a humongous event planner every weekend, and we would have to move thousands of people through. And so things have to be taken care of logistically. And talk about empowerment earlier, Rebecca. The thing that I remember that kind of changed and clicked the light bulb for our teams and some of these huge things that we have every Sunday, thousands and thousands of people, is that at the end of the day, we would have our huddle, we would talk about things, but then I would look at them and say, but if you ever question what it is that you're supposed to do, like, is it a rule? Am I going to be in trouble? I want you to answer the question, what is the most loving thing to do? Mm-hmm. Like if you're standing there, like, do I let them in early? Do I let them in late? Can they go in this door? Just say, what's the most loving thing for me to do right now? That's and good. Man, and I thought that was okay, but the volunteers came back and they were just like, that helped them so much. They stood there and go, the most loving thing for me to do right now is to, and they would fill in the blank and be empowered. So just encourage people to use that and encourage your own volunteers to do the most loving thing.
That's good. That's good. Rebecca, sweet Rebecca, you get the final word. What do you want to leave us with?
I think just the scripture from Romans that I kind of am just like, it's my foundation for all this stuff. And it's Romans 15:7-13, and it's the Message version. But it says, so reach out and welcome others. And other translations say receive others. It says, God has received you. Jesus did it. Now you do it. And Jesus, staying true to God's purposes, reached out in a special way to the Jewish insiders, so the people at the church, so that the old ancestral promises would come true for them. As a result, non-Jewish outsiders, so the strangers, the potential guests, have been able to experience mercy and to show appreciation to God. And then it says, just think of all the scriptures that will come true in what we do. So that, for me, that's like the biggest motivator and the biggest factor in this, that if we are faithful in loving each other well and building our missional community in this First Impressions ministry that we are cultivating together, if we are faithful in that, then that'll equip us and allow us to be faithful in caring for these Jewish outsiders, or the outsiders, the potential guests that come to us. Then everything, all these promises in the Bible will come true in that process. And that's why I believe that this is the front lines of discipleship. Whatever church leader, whatever you're doing right now, you're doing the right work. By attending this conference, you're investing in yourself and in your volunteers. You're pursuing knowledge and wisdom and organization, because that's, God calls us to that too. And so I think all three of us just want to encourage y'all to continue in that work, to know that this is exactly what God wants us to do, what he's called us to do. It's so very important, because all of God's promises will continue to be revealed to people, and other people will come to know him and see him and be seen by him, be seen by us, and experience him if we're faithful in this work.
That's good.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And for what it's worth, I love the Message. I read it.
Okay, good. Me too.
I love the Message. I like Eugene Peterson. I like the way he thinks, and I like that we can break it down to a practical, relevant level. Now I understand it's not like a transliteration. It's going back to the Greek or Hebrew, but sometimes you just want to hear, what would it sound like today? And so I love that. Thank you for that encouragement.
Yeah.
So good. So good. This has been great. So you can join us at guestservices.church. The three of us are in there every day interacting and talking with people from around the world. And we have all kinds of resources for you at firstimpressionsconference.com. Just go and check it out. Find something that's useful for you. Be encouraged. And thank you for watching this today.